Welcome to Slow and Steady, the podcast where you get to follow along as we build products in public. Each week we'll give you an honest peek into our lives as we share our struggles, our wins, and everything in between. I'm Benedikt and I'm feeling productive.
And I'm Benedicte. Today is April 1st. Ooh, and this is episode number 134. I am feeling eager for many reasons, but one of them being that we have a guest today. It's Steve Ruiz, founder of tldraw. So we're wondering, how are you feeling and how's your week been?
Hey, how's it going? Week is going pretty good, and I guess I'm feeling excited. I'll say that.
Excited.
What are you? Very excited.
Excited.
You're like, okay, I'm excited.
I'm excited. Yeah, definitely. A little bit daunted. A little bit. I think I had a different word for this, but yeah, a lot of interesting things have been happening.
Anything in particular you want to share?
Yeah. So I just finished raising money for tldraw. So we are now tldraw Inc. And this little side project that I've been working on for the last year, or better part of the last year, is now going to be my main thing for a while longer. So yeah,
that's so cool.
Amazing.
Before we get into juicy details, can you tell us a little bit more about tldraw and its origin story?
Yeah, for sure. So first off, I'm Steve. I'm living in London, originally from Chicago. And I guess my background is more in art and design. So until about 2015, I was on the contemporary art track, and had a studio and paintings. And if you wanted to see paintings, you could look up steveruizart.com and you can see my nice little watercolors. But of course, around 2015, I was 30, got into design, got into tech. I needed to make some money, and so I decided to stick with the kind of try and combine the creative work that I had with a little bit of analytical work that I'd been doing in a different field previously. Got into design, ended up being able to build a little bit on the kind of little technical skill that I had from building portfolio websites and such as an artist. Turned that into being a designer who codes when that was super hot back in 2017. And then bounced between products, ended up working for a company called Framer, doing their education. Worked for another design tool company called Play out in New York. And around that same time, I started working more into open source. So open source projects that kind of were not quite design, but kind of design tool adjacent. After working at Framer and Play, I was kind of getting more involved with design tools as software, and which are fascinating. And I don't know if you're, whether you're a designer or whether you just kind of hang out in Figma or something like that, they're pretty cool UIs and they're pretty tricky products. So I had done something with arrows called Perfect Arrows, which was a little algorithm for saying all right, I have these 2 points, draw me a good looking arrow between them, or I have 2 boxes, draw a good looking arrow between the 2 boxes, which is a little more complex than you'd expect, because you want it to curve, but you would want it to curve correctly, and if the boxes are overlapping, then that's a whole other story. And so anyway, that was my first big open source project, was building these Perfect Arrows algorithm in public. A lot on Twitter, a lot of GIFs and stuff on Twitter. And then later on, I did another algorithm called Perfect Freehand, which is for it's for a variable width line, or for a pressure sensitive line that gets thicker and thinner as you push harder or less hard. And that's something that there's really nothing else in open source that satisfies that, or that fills that need. So anyway, I spent 6 months hacking on an algorithm for doing that, to take in my mouse positions and smooth them, and then create a new set of points that wrap around the input points in order to create that kind of digital link. This is called Perfect Freehand. If you look it up, it's much easier to play with than it is for me to describe it over audio. anyway, so I'm getting back to tldraw. So around this time, I'd built a couple of these like kind of canvas UIs for the arrows, and then for the freehand, and then for another project called globs, like globs.design is the website, and that was part of Perfect Freehand, trying to figure out whether I could use this other weird glob shape primitive for the ink for the Perfect Freehand. Ended up not being able to use it for Perfect Freehand. I never figured out exactly how to make a line out of globs, but I did create an entire like kind of design editor where the only thing you have to work with is this glob shape. And again, that's at globs.design. So at this point, I had made like a bunch of these. This is like my third or fourth time building this this UI pattern, this canvas UI pattern, and globs was pretty advanced. You could resize things and copy them and paste them. So I started building another kind of white, like infinite canvas engine just for myself that was more flexible. Like globs was great, but you really could only use globs. Like you couldn't do anything. Like it was just like you didn't have like rectangles or anything. It was just globs. So I started building one that I could put any sort of primitive that I wanted in there, globs or points or anything. Originally, it also had like a code editor in there, so I could program like imperatively say like, okay, create these points, and then then switch over into like kind of design mode and interact with those and drag them around, kind of like a scriptable design tool. Globs also has a code editor for the same reason. So once I started building this kind of generic thing, this white label, like, okay, this will do anything kind of engine, I had other people right away kind of reach out and say like, hey, this is really cool. We had this idea that involved a whiteboard or infinite canvas. Like, can we build on this? Is this open source? Can we like use this? And that got me thinking, okay, well, maybe there's a project here. Maybe there's an open source project for the editor itself. And at this point, I was either going to go work for Figma or for Adobe, and was kind of like talking to different companies about my next move. And I figured, okay, those will probably resolve pretty soon. So I'll just quit my job, work on this for a couple of months, and then go work for one of those companies. I started working on it.
When was this?
This was like, this is like about a year ago. So I started thinking about this in March, and then I actually decided to. I think things got more serious around May, and then I went full time. I quit my job and went full time in July. So July of 2021. I say, okay, I'm going to work on tldraw for the next couple of months. I decided by then, I was okay, next 6 months. By the end of the year, I'm going to go do something else. But I have 6 months. I'm going to build this thing that I'm going to call tldraw. And it's going to be a open source whiteboarding, digital virtual whiteboard. Just as kind of like a minimum specificate, or like kind of a minimum set of features that I wanted in this thing. And then I'm going to open source it, but I'm also going to open source like kind of an infrastructure layer, something that anyone else could build on if they wanted to make something like this. And this is in React, so you could use this the same tech to build like all sorts of whiteboards that had different React components, like moving around on a canvas. And that's what I did. I immediately got some corporate sponsorship, so the financial hit that I was expecting just never happened. I was like, all right, cool. My contractor fee is still being paid by someone else, but I don't have to do anything for anyone else. Like I'm just having one phone call.
So how did that work? Like, how did the sponsorships work?
I was building this in, again, kind of like on Twitter and in public. And I had, I'd started taking GitHub sponsors a little bit, and being pretty open about like the challenges about working on an open source project and all that. But what had happened is a very large company was building a new whiteboarding tool that needed to work in the browser. And they kind of didn't have a special team to be doing this. Whiteboards are quite hard. Virtual canvases in general are like quite hard to to build. There's a lot going on. And yeah, so they reached out. One of their contractors was a follower of mine and was like, hey, we should build on this tldraw thing. Like, this guy's, building exactly the thing that we would love to start with. And so I talked to them, and it turned out that this was a good fit. And so, yeah, we drafted up a contract, and it was like a sponsorship relationship. So I met with them like once a week, but otherwise I was just being paid to work on my open source, which was fantastic. And then I also had the project like as sponsorware. So I was kind of really exploring whether sponsorship would work as a model, like to sustain me, but also like whether it could like contribute to the hype of the project, like build a reputation for the project. So the money at first didn't really matter, but it was more about like getting people to be sponsoring. So for tldraw.com, I used like GitHub sponsors as like a kind of a like sponsorware, I guess you could call it. So in order to visit tldraw.com, you had to be a sponsor of me at any level. So I was posting all these GIFs and like in progress, like devlogs and things like that on Twitter. And I had a link to tldraw, but you couldn't actually get there unless you were like, give me $1. And luckily, I mean, a lot of people gave more than $1, and a lot of people have continued being sponsors at some level ever since, which was fantastic. I think, I mean, it gets a little bit more complicated, but I have a couple of hundred sponsors on GitHub sponsors now. So I built that over from July, and then I launched in November, kind of towards the end of November. And it was like top of Hacker News. It was like #1 trending repo on GitHub.
Winning
like
the internet.
Yeah, like, I mean, as far as like a small open source project could be, I think it did pretty well. All the metrics that you would have in this tiny world seem to be hit. And yeah, a lot of people immediately got involved in the repo, and there were all sorts of contributions and issues and bug fixes. And what I thought was most interesting is how many other people took this and immediately started building on it. My expectation was that people would be building on that like infrastructure layer, the kind of the lower down layer, but like almost everyone just took tldraw, forked it, and like hacked it to work for their product or for their case, which is fine. And and so we had like, suddenly there was tons of inbound, I was getting like emails and DMs and everything from folks who were like, hey, can we build on this? Or we're building on this, or we just shipped something like that was built on this, or like, can you make it do X, Y, or Z so that we could build on it? Or could we use your multiplayer? Or could we use your, backend for this or that? And since the whole thing was open, everything, it was just this like flurry of activity around it. And so it was kind of this interesting point. I was either gonna by now I was either gonna go to work for Adobe in January, or I could kind of like cancel my contract and keep working on this. And so and it could have been like a SaaS product, like something that I grew organically, like tldraw.com, like have a private paid subscription to it, or have a Teams license. And alternatively, I could say like, well, a lot of teams want to build on this. Maybe I can like have like support agreements, or I could continue with kind of content creation and sponsorship and grow it that way. And so I started talking more seriously to these teams who are working on this and saying like, what are you actually looking for? Like what would be the ideal product for whatever your idea is? And talking to other founders about like, hey, is there like, what's viable here? Like, what are my options? And then eventually also talking to VCs about like, is this something that you think could grow? And like which one of these paths could grow as well? So and also talking to a lot of other companies who might want to, or who kind of wanted to kind of acqui-hire me and the project and grow it internally. So I had a ton of options, and I had not that much time to decide. I had like a month, and it was like Christmas.
Because
So
Adobe was expecting you to come to work.
Yeah. So luckily, by like, a month before I was supposed to start with Adobe, I'd made a decision that I think there was. Well, I hadn't really decided which path to go, but I knew that there were probably some viable paths to go. So I made that very difficult choice of canceling a lucrative tech salary startup, or not startup, but tech salary. Adobe's not quite a startup anymore. Giant company.
Kind of the opposite of a startup at this point.
Yeah, exactly. It's been some years. But yeah, I decided to cancel that contract and focus on this at least for a while longer. Had a lot more serious conversations with other founders and other VCs, and decided I wanted to go the VC route. I wanted to raise some money. The reason for this was that most of the conversations that I had with teams, they were not looking necessarily just for something to build on, but like something that was like complete that they could develop against. So rather than having, here's an SDK that you could use to build a Canvas application. It was much more like, hey, we just want to embed something like Mapbox that works, but that we could still develop against. And so for a Canvas to work, that also kind of involves like multiplayer and exporting and different rendering solutions. It's a much bigger problem than I thought I could do alone. And that I think that the scope of the opportunity meant that growing it organically, I think, would have taken a little too long. So I was like, let's go, let's raise some money. And
that just happened. Or how did? Can you tell us some more about how you closed the deal?
Well, you just go to the, just say yes. And no, it's funny. I've talked. I think I had a much easier time doing this than most people who want to raise money. One, because I had a product that people were using already. Like there were like 30,000 people a month active using tldraw after like 6 weeks, which is hardcore. That number is kind of stabilized now since it's no longer like brand new. But it was still like there was a lot of hype, and it was, again, after 6 weeks, it was at like 5,000 GitHub stars. So it, like, as far as an open source project goes, it was like healthy, I had built up my own Twitter following to a decent size, based mostly on these like 8-second GIFs of me trying to figure out how to rotate shapes. All this like kind of crazy scene graph type of Twitter content. So I guess there were a lot of things that made it easier just from the get-go. So, the network had grown, the product, people liked it. I could show someone that I had built something and could build something. And then, there was also a couple of hundred sponsors, and including teams who were already trying to de-risk building on this by paying me, which seems like a good foundation for a company. So long story short, I spent like 3 weeks like in active fundraising, which, if I don't know, have you ever this was my first time, but have you ever done this before?
No.
You have? Yeah.
No, Benedikt, I swear it's in this
we
way.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah, 3 weeks is pretty great. Like I don't think you can get it much faster than that.
I mean, I did talk to founders who like, scared the hell out of me by saying like you should be able to do this in a week. Like you should have your list and go through them. Just like I'm not. I'm just kind of and honestly, I don't think I did a very good like clean job of it. Like I definitely was excited about people and thought like, yeah, this sounds great. Like, let's go. And then I would talk to someone else and be like, oh, this sounds great. Let's go. And so I think I was accidentally very not disrespectful, but I think I stepped on some toes in terms of the whole VC fundraising dance. But yeah, I found my lead, and then I'm still kind of rolling up all the angels, but so nothing. I haven't announced it yet, so I'll keep it kind of ambiguous about who's involved, but a lot of really, really cool people are involved. And yeah, that sort of brings me to today. I somehow, was able to raise a whole bunch of money without any business plan or even a deck. Just like a multiplayer tldraw project that described what I wanted to do.
But if we step back a little bit, you've been at it for a while. It's not, you're like,
sure.
It's easy. And it's like, you chose a really hard technical challenge. Because we can all see, and I've seen your GIFs, and I did, math algorithm stuff in university. I would never ever try to endeavor what you have done. And you have done it, and you've shown consistently that you've done it. So it might feel easy now, and you kind of did it a little bit at the time. But like for us listening to this story, like there are years there where you were working consistently on this, which kind of led to it being an easy 3-week kind of race. But you couldn't have started today and like be there in 2 months, right? It's all of that work. So I have a question on that. Like, what got you motivated to work on all these algorithms? Like, why make perfect arrow? Like, what got you to sit down and like do the math and do the
right? Okay, so there are a couple of places where this starts, because again, like I didn't go to university. I went to university for painting. I have no sort of background in math, and that said, you can be a visual artist and still be good at math. But I didn't know I had that ability until very recently. I think there's like two origin stories here. The first, probably the first, is when I was working at Framer. I was doing a video about stars, like a star rating control. Like, let's build a component for like rating something between 0 and 5 stars. And these were tutorial videos, and I don't know if you've ever made tutorial videos, but tutorial videos are really fragile. If you encounter a bug or something, it kind of can throw off the entire thing, even after like 2 hours of work. And so I was making a star in Framer, and I noticed that the star was like off center. It was like glued
like 1 pixel.
No, it was significant. It was like, here you had this is going to be hard to describe, but you had a bounding box, right? Like a box that the shape sits inside of, and the star, if you could imagine, was like stuck to the top of the box. So it wasn't in the middle of the box. The star was at the top of the box. Like the top of the star was touching the top, but the bottom wasn't touching the bottom. There was like a gap there at the bottom, and I was like, what? I can't believe this. Like, and so I went to Figma, and I drew a star there, and sure enough, that star was also stuck at the top. It's not touching the bottom. And I go to Sketch, and the same thing. And I was like, what is going on? Like, why are all these stars off center? So I like crack open the because I was working at Framer, I could go look at the source code, which is quite nice. And well, it turns out that the way that you draw a star, that there's a sort of a visual algorithm for this that is the same for, like, this is how everyone draws their stars, right? And you do it with again, this is going to be hard over audio, so I'll try not to talk with my hands as I do it. You have a box, and you want the star to be in the middle of the box or inside of the box. And so the first thing you do is you draw a circle or an ellipse that touches all 4 sides of the box. And then you know how many points your star has. Let's say it's 5. You find 5 evenly distributed points along that circle. And then you find the same number of points in a kind of smaller circle inside of that circle. And then you just kind of connect the lines. And the problem is that if you take a circle and you put 5 equal points around the corners of that circle, like those, this is not going to work over radio. But like,
no, but I can
one of those
actually,
points is going to touch
I've
the
just
top
been
of the,
listening, and I
Yeah,
can
right?
I can visualize it. I can visualize it.
like the bottom 2 points are not going to touch the bottom of the box. Like the bottom of the circle is going to touch the bottom of the box, so the bottom of 2 points aren't. They're going to kind of be above it. And so that was like my first time thinking and like kind of thinking about like, oh, well, how did these algorithms actually affect the user experience of these tools? And of course, a drawing tool or graphics tool, design tool is like full of these types of little mathy problem solving things one way or another. And yeah, so I of course created a little fork that had my solution, which is you actually measure like what's the true bounding box of those points, and then you offset the shape by that distance, and now we have a perfect star in the middle of the box, and hooray! And I've wrote a whole article on this somewhere, Code Sandbox kind of examples and stuff. But yeah, that was my first kind of experience with this inside of design tools. The better origin story, perhaps the real foundation for this, right, was that I was working at I was in high school and I was working at a pizza place, and like on Friday nights just cutting pizzas. Like my job was to like cook and cut pizzas. It was fun, and people would have different requests when they ordered a pizza. Like I want this well done or not well done, or I want pepperoni on half of it. And sometimes they asked for specific cuts. So I want this cut into like kind of square cut, or I want this pie cut, into triangles. And one day we got a request that I want this pie cut, right? So I want it to be cut into triangles, and I want it to have 11 equal slices. I want this pizza to be cut into 11 equal slices. If you Google this, you will find my question about the same topic, which has sort of become like a math meme. I think it has like hundreds of thousands of replies on Quora, and like there are different blog posts about this. And the question was like, how would you do this without in a kitchen? Like without a protractor, without any sort of like actual way of doing this. Like what's a practical, like how would a carpenter do this? Like how do you cut a circle into 11 equal divisions with nothing? And the answer, I think it took us like 3 pizzas to get it right. And so we got to eat our mistakes at that job. So we made a lot of them. And yeah, but eventually we kind of approximated it, and there we go. The answer, there are some interesting answers, and you can look it up. The one thing you do is you kind of you could kind of take your hand, kind of spread your fingers out, make like a V or something like that, and you just guess. Your first step is to guess, and then your next step is to like walk your fingers around, like kind of repeat that guess all the way around. And if you reach the end and there's still space left over, then you kind of do it again, but you just kind of expand your fingers a little bit. So you guess bigger, and then you repeat that. And if you kind of reach the end and you overshoot it, then you just kind of shrink that guess. And you kind of do that a couple of times until you get close enough. Which is like surprisingly like the same way that you do square roots or any kind of complex problem, is you just kind of like iterate and guess and do it that way. So that was that was the other kind of origin story for how like my interaction with geometric.
I love both origin stories. These are, I think I could listen to you for. You need to get your own podcast because you tell stories really well. But yeah, Benedikt.
I feel like well, just as a comment, but I feel like the perfect combination of this story or those 2 stories would be like, I want my pizza cut into a star and want it centered in a box.
Yeah, otherwise whoever gets that bottom piece is gonna have way more pizza than the rest. Yeah, they I mean, turns out that I just really loved those problems when I was on when my daughter was born, and then I was on paternity leave. I kind of spent her naps like reading more about these like visual algorithms, like, how do you draw a line in pixels, or like how do you like do like ray testing or in voxels and all that. And so or like, how does shadow casting work in an environment? How do you decide like on a shadow polygon? Those were all like problems that were very, very small in scope, and I could do them in like, or work on them in like an hour or two while my kids slept. So that sort of built up my familiarity with like math, I suppose, in this context, and like programmatic or computational geometry and computational I don't know, visual algorithms or whatever, which was all very good practice once I started getting into arrows, and then later, freehand like digital ink and curves and stuff. That was wild. But what's fun is yeah.
So you kept on working on these kind of different algorithms, the globs and the arrows and the freehand kind of as intellectual pursuits, I guess. Is that the term? Like, you wanted to know if you could make it happen, or you wanted to know how it was working? Or did you at that time think like, hey, I do these things so that I will become a better developer and like become more skilled, and then maybe I can make something or get a better job? Did you have any of those kinds of goals or thoughts in your mind? Or was it more like playing?
First it was play. It was definitely play early on, because problems like shadow casting or doing lines, Bresenham, I think is the whatever, like that. Those are solved problems. Those are, I wasn't creating anything new there. I was just sort of like figuring out, oh, this is how this stuff works. What was fun is that I would then start running into problems that like weren't solved. And so like this arrows thing, like there was no open source solution for like, how do I draw a nice looking arrow between these 2 points? Like programmatically without knowing where those points are.
Because it's hard. That's why there wasn't any solution.
Yeah, because like, why not? Like, just like, you don't really need a general solution, which is the true answer to that question. But I did. I was making state charts, man. I wanted my arrows. We didn't talk about that, but that was a different product. But like the freehand thing was a great example of that, because what I had originally done was I was making videos of for play. I was trying to make like, thinking about content and like, how do we stream this, and how do we do like live streams with play. And play is a design tool, but it was a design tool for your mobile phone, or it is a design tool for your mobile phone, and now iPad as well. Really, really fun project to work on, a really interesting just piece of software. But the thing is that if you're doing like a demo on a desktop and you want to like draw attention to one part of the screen, you can kind of just wave your cursor at it. You can kind of just float it and kind of draw little circles, in a corner. Even if you're on a live stream and you can't do anything in post. But if you have basically a video feed of a mobile phone, you can't do that because there's no cursor. And there might, if you have the camera actually shooting your hand on top of the phone, then you can kind of point to things, but otherwise there's no like pointer. So I was like, damn, how do I point to things in this situation? So I was like, all right, I'll just, like how they have it on like American, I assume all international sports, but definitely American football, like they draw on the screen. They like take a little pen and draw like a yellow line. Be like, this guy here is going to go run over here and like draw an arrow. And I was like, I need to do that. So I kind of looked up like, well, what do you call that? And it turns out it's called a telestrator, is the name of the type of software or product that does this. And so I'm like, okay, I need a telestrator. I need to be able to draw on my screen as I'm sharing that screen or as I'm recording. there are some solutions that are like part of other streaming packages, but there's nothing open source, I couldn't find anything open source at the time or anything free. So I was like, all right, well, I've built a drawing tool before, like a little, drawing tool. I still have all that code. I still have the React app that I had made for that. So let me just quickly throw together an Electron app that lets me just put that on top of the screen and ignore events, when it's not active. And so I hacked together an Electron app that let me draw on my screen, and it worked great. And I had since I used to be an artist and such, I have all these digital like styluses and things like that for like digital painting. And so I was able to have my phone in one hand and be like, using the device, and then have the stylus over here and be like drawing circles like around the parts of the video that I wanted to draw attention to. And it was really great, and it worked really well. The only thing is that the stylus could do pressure. It was like an expensive little Wacom tablet. It knows about pressure like an iPad pencil. And I was like, well, how do I make my line get thicker or thinner depending on the pressure, right? Like I wanted to also use that pressure. And so I looked up, okay, well, how do you do a pressure sensitive line? Like, what's the open source solution for this? And there was like nothing. There was nothing there. There was like one strategy, which is you take all the points, the kind of input points, and then you because like, by the way, like SVG can't do a pressure sense, like a variable width line. You can only have one stroke width. Likewise with Canvas, you can only have one stroke width. So either you do it like the Photoshop way of like essentially stamping a circle like thousands of times along the curve of the path and just make the circle bigger or smaller. Or you do that with lines. You draw lots of little lines and have the lines have a bigger or smaller width. And most of the solutions that I saw for web did it with lines. So if you look at like signature.js, I want to say, it kind of has a sort of a pressure sensitive, like it looks like ink, and it's doing that with lots of little lines. But it doesn't look very good. It doesn't look good enough for me, and it wouldn't work in SVG. And so I was like, all right, well, I guess I can just start working on this, like this is why not? Like, how hard could it be?
How hard could it be? Yeah. I'm wondering, how hard could it be?
It's hard. It was a really hard one. It was like, it was ridiculous. It took me, I probably worked on that for like 6 months in my spare time, just iterating on this perfect freehand, or what became perfect freehand. And, again, building it on Twitter, and there's just hundreds of GIFs of this line algorithm sort of in progress. But I just wanted to have it, for my little Telestrator app, which is on GitHub. And
but 6 months is a long time to work on something where you don't have an end in sight, right? You don't know if you're actually going to be able to, or did you feel like, oh, I will be able to solve this, or did you?
Oh no, this was just play. I mean, it was still play, but it felt like it was play in the right direction. It was like, and by the way, like it never makes any sense to spend 6 months on a line, like, which apparently is why no one had done it. But I don't know. I really liked this. I mean, it kind of felt like there's a French word for this, like dérivé or something. I kind of like an aimless wander, kind of like a playful wander through a city or through an environment. And that's the way I liked, like, recreational programming for myself is very much about that, where one thing kind of leads to the next, and maybe it causes a stop over here, and there's no destination in mind, but it's just sort of like a nice wander. And especially if I'm sharing that story as I work on it, it can be pretty fun, as the character of Steve discovers a new rabbit hole to dive into. And so I don't know. I think it's I think it's pretty engaging content, and it's certainly fun for me to work on. And so, yeah, I wasn't sure where it was going, but I know that I knew that I would get there pretty soon. It was just like a lot of little edge cases and problems and performance things in order to make it like an actual solution that other people could use. But now it is an actual solution that other people can use. And if you are building anything that involves like a pen kind of tool for whatever reason, annotation, signatures, whatever, you should be using Perfect Freehand. It is significantly better than anything else out there. Yeah.
I just want to dig even deeper, because I think I've seen a lot of people, on Twitter and also in our community, struggling with that, like sitting down to work and feeling like you're kind of not getting anywhere. Like you've been working or coding for an hour or two, and you don't kind of have a result at the end of it, because the result is going to be far off. And if you do that naturally, maybe you don't have any tips to share, but like what, how do you feel after that kind of session? Like, how do you make yourself sit down for another one of those sessions where you're not sure if this is going to work, or if this time has been, well, I'm saying well spent in like quotes, because I have no better word for it. And do you feel like maybe your artistic background can helps in that kind of sessions scenarios?
Yeah, actually, I mean, I haven't really had a chance to talk much about this, but I do think that the as a studio artist, you develop a kind of a way of working and expectations for like what work looks like that are very, very different than like what you get at a normal job, or in really any other field. Where I think the biggest challenge to being a studio artist is like it's never a complete absence of external constraints, but it is comparatively like completely unconstrained. And that's both a blessing because you can do whatever you want, and a curse because you have no way of knowing what to do. And relying on your own, like relying on intrinsic motivation as like the only thing to direct you. And to identify like when things are working and when things are not working, when there's literally no, like, there's no, it's not like it doesn't matter whether things work or not. Anyway, that's
just to clarify.
So
as a studio artist, you kind of make the paintings first and then sell them, right? So it's like your creative expression, and then is that what you mean by like there's no constraints?
I mean, Yeah, I mean,
I just wanted to, for the people who are not into the art world.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like somebody said, paint this picture. You can do pretty much whatever you want. Yes. Okay, go on. Sorry.
Speaking about just like as an exhibiting artist, not as like I have done portraits and stuff like that, and that's fun. But if it's just your own thing, then that can be quite challenging. It really requires you to learn how to operate in that kind of vacuum of anyone asking for anything, because you're really not building anything that anyone asks for. And so I think there's kind of two things. One is to always be building in a certain direction, So it's hard to say this. It's like you establish kind of a framework. I'll just stick with painting as like an example. If I wanted to make a group of paintings, spend a couple of months making paintings, and I wanted to be able to exhibit those paintings at the end of that time, and I wanted the paintings to look like cohesive and consistent, I would make some early decisions that would somewhat constrain what those paintings could look like, while not making any, while not constraining other parts of what those paintings could look like. So, for example, I might build the same set or the same size of canvases, right? So everything is, 16 inches by 20 inches, and I might make decisions about like what materials I'm using, maybe even what colors I'm using. And then within those conditions, which are, very vague and, could produce all sorts of outcomes, whatever outcomes I produced would look fairly consistent. And so you're like, just give it a direction and then do whatever you want within those parameters, and you'll come up with the right answer at the end, because there really isn't a right answer. There's just inconsistent answers, and you want your answers to be consistent. You want your answers to be in a certain direction. That's one way to do it. And then the other way to do it is to always be building on what you've built previously. So this is much easier to do in software than it is in Studio, but you want whatever next creative decision you're doing to like incorporate and roll up whatever you've done previously. So maybe you do some experiments on paper. You want to then do some work on canvas. Whatever you learned on paper, like maybe that's a visual thing, or maybe that's like a material thing, or maybe that's a subject matter thing, but like bring that into the paintings, or bring that onto the canvas. Again, very hard to do in the studio, much easier to do in code, which is to say, like, if you've built something, if you've developed knowledge about something, maybe that's, in my case, that was like, all right, 2D vectors, like working on arrows taught me a lot about like linear geometry and vectors and things like that. And so the next thing that I didn't really matter what it was, as long as it just sort of incorporated what I had just learned, and what I had just sort of developed. Like, it didn't have to be about arrows anymore. It could be about something completely different, but as long as it rolled up those things that I had used previously, then it would be consistent, and that other thing would never have been wasted. Ideally, you don't want to have you wouldn't want to have any waste, right? Like, everything has a part, even if that part is in the next thing, and even if that next thing is only a part of the next thing, and it's just churning, right? I think the benefit to talking about your work and sharing it as you do it, which I realize not everyone is into, and that's fine, but the benefit of that is that the content that you're creating along the way sort of becomes the thing. And that, like, oh, if this arrows thing actually works and becomes like a useful open source library, then that's a bonus, because like I've already been able to do all this storytelling and connect with other interesting people who are into this space. And there's not a huge market for arrows jobs or anything, but like if I was into, if I wanted to work with arrows, and I'd already established myself as the arrows guy. So, most of the outcome had already been achieved even before, before the programming completed or was successful, and would have been successful even if the programming part of it hadn't been successful. So I suppose that's a very, very long answer to your question of like, how do you feel good about wasting time? Just make sure that your breadcrumbs are interesting breadcrumbs, and that it's not like that you could stop at any point and still have made progress with the other goals that are associated with it.
So one follow-up question on that, though, do you feel like, or have you thought about raising money and like this becoming a business? Like, how will this affect like your way of working on it? Because suddenly you're very much getting outside constraints, and suddenly there are expectations, and it's not necessarily just a thing you do for fun anymore. It's actually becoming a job.
Yeah. And
have you any thoughts on that?
I mean, this work has never really been as pure as it might sound. This is, I'm not I haven't been an artist for a while. I haven't thought of my work as art. But I have been very informed by the ways of working that have come from that. And I think that they generally work good for progress, or for products rather. Yeah. That the kind of, I mean, again, I kind of have always been in the design organization in one way or another. And a lot of those, cheesy charts that designers will show about like, here's how the progress for product development goes, where it's like a chaotic line that sort of becomes a straight line. That's very familiar from like what a studio artist would do. So there's some connect. It's not a complete disconnect, and I think that as this this company grows, I don't know. I can't see it being a bad thing to have in the kind of the DNA or the culture of the company. Is that like trust yourself, that like what you're interested in can become something that is valuable, and yeah, I would hope that doesn't get lost, even as we get work more with clients and work more with teams and have a clearer goal of like where we're headed, and like what success looks like. But yeah, I think that there's always going to be a lot of room for like, I mean, even just the idea of like, hey, we have a canvas, like what can we do with this, or like
yeah,
like you can put anything on it, like what should we put on it? Like I think there's going to be a lot of room for experimentation there as well.
Have you thought about what your next focus for like recreational programming will be? Because I feel like
I think when you
I love that term. I'm going to start using that term because I have friends who are like, we're working all the time. And I'm like, no, this is work. And then it looks like I'm doing exactly the same thing, but this is hobby, like, but recreational programming. I'm going to start calling it that because sometimes that's what you want to do at night, right? You don't want to watch a movie. You want to code something just because you made it up in your mind that maybe that could work or whatever, recreational programming. Cool. Anyway, back to Benedict's question. I just now have a term for it.
Yeah, feel free. You can use it. I've also used the term fantasy adventure programming for this type of stuff, especially as it relates to content creation. But your question was about like, what am I going to do on the side? I think when you do a startup, you kind of give that up for a little bit. I think
honest answer.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I like. I mean, there are things that tldraw, like the engine, can do and can include that are not necessary to include, but that I've been playing around with just to see if like, what happens if I do. Can I make globs in this new engine? Things like that. And yeah, it's also really fun to take solutions out of a project and like open source them separately or kind of like refine them separately. When you're building a product, as I'm sure you know, like most of the solutions are just good enough. And sometimes good enough is very advanced and very complex, but you don't need to generalize everything. But there are some parts of tldraw that I have quite enjoyed, like saying, okay, like undo redo, like what is a good reusable pattern for undo redo, or like the multiplayer sync, what is a good pattern for that? I mean, there are tons and tons and tons of these that I mean, some of it is like I like making open source, some of it is that I feel like that extra pressure makes the quality that much better, is to like do a pass of like, okay, if this solution was a general solution, what would it look like or what would it change? And it kind of, you end up with something nicer in the end. So yeah, maybe it'll just be about carving off little pieces of tldraw and opening them up separately. That'll be my fantasy adventure.
I feel like, just to mention back to the artist thing, I feel like the artists in my life have a very good way of receiving feedback. Like seems like you've, through both education, if you've had artistic education or through just the work, have learned to be like, that's feedback that I'm just not going to listen to. Like, thank you for giving that to me. And then this is feedback I'm going to listen to. And that in some way it feels like they are better at showing off their early work without having to go and crawl under, their blanket afterwards. Or maybe they're just faking it like a lot of us. But you feel like you've had
art school,
exposure to that?
Art school is traumatic So
Okay, so you're all just robots.
Nothing can ever hurt me as much as I've been hurt.
So what's it called? Desensitivity training?
Yeah,
Art school is basically
exactly.
desensitivity training.
No, I mean, it is such a, no, I mean, when you're, again, like when there are no external constraints on what you do, what you do is extremely revealing about what you are and what you care about. And somehow working in software is, by comparison, so much easier because it's like, oh, it's about building a product. It's not about me, like as a person or like as an identity. I mean, like, oh my God, it's receiving feedback on your software or your product is like, yeah, no, I it's easy. It's and I mean, like, what's the worst that I mean, like, this should not be like receiving feedback on your stuff or your programming. It's not about you, and so that makes it easy. That's not always the case in art.
I'm going to practice that though, because since I don't have an artistic identity on the side, like you have, like I feel like my product is me, and that is making everything harder, and I know it. So that's why I'm asking you all these questions also.
I guess it would be possible, right, to be identified, or I feel like you're identified with like software stuff. Other Benedikt, do you feel the same way? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think that's actually true. Like the more time you spend on it, like the more sweat and energy you put into it. Like every comment of a customer that's like, yeah, right, doesn't it just do that? Like it's so obvious, and you're like, yeah, but like, don't you see like the 12,000 hours I already spent on it? And this constraint is more complicated than you actually think it is, and like actually have thought about this long and hard.
And I am a good engineer, I promise.
Yeah. At some point, you feel a little bit attacked by like small comments like that. But then again, it's like also kind of stupid to feel that way because it's not about you.
I guess
I feel like the more you pour your heart into it, the more you the more you get annoyed by comments like that.
I think I've spent enough time now with tldraw. Even Perfect Freehand. These are not quite my babies. Well, they're not quite me, but they are do feel like my babies. So, but it's, it's, I guess it's different. It's so much easier once other people are involved too, right? Like once it's not just your product or just your code or just your, like the fact that it's like tldraw is open source and that like other people have made contributions, and that is validating in two ways. One is that like it takes off that pressure of like that this is just me. I can always lie and say a contributor, right?
Get blame.
Oh, yeah. I should have reviewed that one better, and then like alternatively, it's just not mine anymore.
I guess what's also nice about open source, that particular thing, is like whenever someone complains about something, you can always like, hey, it's open source, just like I'm happy to merge that pull request.
Yeah. Like you research enough to identify the problem. Like I bet you can go one further. No, I've had some really great contributions from people. It's amazing. I try and thank people by name when I like do an update, like on the tldraw Twitter. Almost every update now has someone else's name attached to it, and I feel really good about that.
That's cool. But how will that be going forward? Because I've seen several frameworks that have been open source, and then they're getting VC funding, and there's still that open source kind of component, but then they have their own engineers that are getting, paid handsomely. And it's like that weird disconnect where it's like, okay, should people still work on it for free when it's now a commercial product? And what part of it is the commercial product and what part of it is the open source product? What are your thoughts on? I guess this is early days, but what are your thoughts on that now?
So I guess I'm still learning about this, but like, how do you make an open source company, or how do you make a company where open source figures into it? I do think that open source still makes sense for tldraw, because it is something that I want other people to develop against. So you might embed tldraw in your application, but you still might want to program against it in the same way that you might program against like a text editor, like a Monaco editor or whatever. Make it your own, change how it looks, add the stuff that you need, etc. So open source makes sense for this, but it would still be like open core. It's that like a lot of the things that we're going to be building don't have to be open source, or maybe shouldn't, to make the company viable. So things like the multiplayer or backend solutions, and all the conflict resolution, the any sort of website like meta product around tldraw, all the authentication services like that. So there's plenty of work to do that just doesn't fall into the open source camp. And then beyond that, I mean, I would only want people to be contributing if like there's something that's missing for them, or that they want to make better. Like, I mean, I like the idea of just contributing to an open source project out of the kindness of your heart, because you want it to be better. But I'm also very like, you don't have to do that with tldraw. I would want those contributions to be more motivated by like, we're using this and we found a bug, and it's just faster if we fix it. Or we're using this and we would love to have this other feature. Let's work with the people on the team in order to put our own dev on that, accelerate it beyond what might be on our roadmap. Like, we want the thing sooner is a good motivation for open source contribution. Yeah, but hopefully the engine is fully open source and can be, I think there's a like licensed correctly, so that we don't get ripped off and like resold. They're all the normal concerns about open source. As open as we can, while still having the best chance to succeed as a company.
Yeah. So what's the tech stack? We've been talking a lot about mindset and stuff, but just so people know.
the nitty gritty. At the moment, everything is TypeScript. The kind of the core engine, there's kind of two parts. It's an interesting architecture. At the center is this core class, essentially, that is managing the scene. So with an app like, I'll use Figma as an example, right? Figma, you have a bunch of shapes on the canvas, a bunch of elements. Some of them are children of other shapes or frames. And they're all positioned relative to each other and relative to their parent. The way that you represent that is through a graph, and you call that a scene graph. So this is like, the page is the root, sort of. Or maybe the document is the root, and each page is a node beneath that, and then each page has like elements, other nodes, and those nodes can be parents to other nodes. So that's the scene graph, and managing a scene graph is a little complex. And part of the complexity there is like deciding, okay, well, first off, what do we need to render? Like, what do we need to put on the screen? Like, what's on screen versus off screen? What's on this page versus what's on the other page? And then like, where do those things go? And that's deciding where things go is also kind of a complex mathematical process, where you kind of look at, okay, well, what's the root? Where's the root? And then where's that next child? And then where's that child and this child? And then finally we know enough to be able to put those leaf nodes, those other nodes on there. So everyone's position is based on its parent's position, which is based on its parent's position. And that's matrix math.
And then the canvas is infinite.
And the canvas is infinite, so you can go anywhere. But yeah, that core really just manages that scene graph, and it manages like the some of the interactions, like selection, all the different tools are also part of a different graph of like a state graph. So when you select a tool, you kind of like activate that part of the state tree. And then that, like if you click on the select tool, then you start like pointing the canvas, then now you're in a different state. And depending on which state you're in is like, that determines what happens next. So if I am in the select tool and I'm idle, and then I start clicking and I'm in the clicking, pointing the canvas state, and then I start moving the pointer, then now maybe I'm in the selection, like brush selection, where I'm drawing a box and I want to collide things in order to select them. So managing all that is done with a kind of a state tree, a state graph, state chart. Each one of those tools is also kind of just a part of that state chart that you can add. So if I want to use a drawing tool or a rectangle tool, then that's a different part of that state chart. So that's something else that kind of core architecture manages. But it doesn't manage rendering. So it doesn't actually put anything on screen. It just knows what needs to be put on screen and all the information associated with that. And so there's a separate library to do the rendering. And that rendering, currently I'm doing all in React. So you're able to say, okay, this is my graph, all the information coming from the graph. Here's what I want it to look like on the screen. And that could be anything from, putting an SVG on the screen, into the DOM for like a rectangle, or something interactive like a Mapbox map. And you could put that on the screen as well. And so these shapes, parts of the graph, the shapes on the canvas can be interactive. Most of the teams that want to build on this don't want to build whiteboards or drawing apps. They want to do spreadsheets on the canvas. They want to do no code, patches, things like that. So having interactive web content that you can use your web developers to develop is highly advantageous versus, trying to re-implement text editors in Canvas or in WebGL. But if you did want to render into Canvas or render into WebGL or Pixie.js or anything else, you could also do that. Like since the scene graph core is not concerned with rendering, you could use whatever rendering solution you want. I'm doing React as kind of the flagship renderer, but I'm excited about seeing other renders being done in other web frameworks like Svelte, as well as like Canvas and other completely different rendering solutions.
And I guess you could take that information. Kind of tech stack.
Yeah.
You should also make like a laser printer rendering engine.
Yeah, why not? You could do it with checkboxes if you really had enough checkboxes.
No, but it's always fun when you could also like, and then we have a physical. We could do it in the physical world. Anyway, make a studio and start. We have gotten this really cool shop in our neighborhood where you can go and like use all their tools, like a
maker shop.
Yeah, we've had some maker shops, but this is actually more to like, you can go there and like build furniture for your house, or like it's more of an actual like wood shop, but it has a lot of those maker space places. I haven't been able to use it yet, but it's like on my mind that I need to start getting more into like physical things again, because yes,
that's awesome.
We can't all be on the screen all the time. And I think we talked about this another time. Like but
there's if you like tldraw and if you like this type of stuff, you might also like Cuddle, which is another piece of software that's all about like robotic controlled knives, like cutting, which they'd probably be able to use with the type of CNC machines that they would have at a shop like that.
Oh my god!
So, that's what you would play with.
I'm just looking.
Cuddle's
so my daughter is
awesome.
7. My daughter is 7, and I'm like thinking like this is things I can do with her, where like I really can like learn something new and we can like do it together without looking at the screen together. So, but that is totally off topic.
Yeah, robot knives. Yeah,
robot knives. I mean, what 7-year-old wouldn't like robot knives?
Honest question.
But I think maybe did we forget? Like, this has been an awesome conversation. Benedikt, do you have any more questions that we have to get answered?
Not at this moment. Like this, I enjoyed this very much, and I feel like we could go on for like another 2 hours or so. But
I feel like we need to revisit this in about 6 months to a year and hear how this next chapter in your adventure as a business now with funding.
With funding.
How many people? What's the plan on how many people are you hiring?
Yeah,
like what's the immediate plans in case somebody listening wants to jump ships and join your thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a solo founder. So far, it's just me. I'm recruiting. I have the first couple of people are kind of lining up or getting lined up. But yeah, get at me on Twitter. I'm at Steve Ruiz. Okay, I'm sure there'll be a link in the show notes. And yeah, if this is the type of thing that you like working on, whether that's on the rendering side, that's going to kind of come into play later. So if you've been building game engines and want to do that for a different type of product, then let me know. And if you are a JavaScript, TypeScript developer, web developer who likes this type of problem space and always wanted to build your own Figma, get at me as well. I mean, this is going to be a team. We're calling it like pre-seed funding, although it's like a couple of million, so it's quite a lot of pre-seed funding. So we have enough for a team of probably 6 or 7 people, but it's going to grow fairly soon, I think. And so yeah, there's a lot of work to do, and it's pretty fun to work on. And luckily I've had the chance to build this the code base like 4 or 5 times now, so everything's pretty well organized and architected. So all the super hard problems, no, there's still a lot of super hard problems.
No, but it looks like it's a really good foundation, and I've seen that through your Twitter updates and the talk to the other people, like how well thought out that you're addressing these problems and you're trying to do them like properly, and it's very like well. The problems are very well formulated, and your answers to them are also very well formulated. So it seems like your code base would be fairly tidy compared to a lot of other startups. So I guess tidier and tighter. I think maybe the last question then could be, why is it called tldraw?
Okay, remember when I talked about that Telestrator app for drawing on your screen? I bought the domain for that app. So tldraw, I think still if you download the Telestrator Electron application, it's named tldraw. So I was going to pronounce it tldraw, like tldraw. And then I just had the domain and I hadn't used it. So when it came time to like publish this new whiteboarding product that I had, I was like, hey, I'll just call it like a tiny little drawing app, like TL, and then I'll use that domain because it's short and it's clean.com domain. And so sort of loosely stands for tiny little drawing app, but also like we wanted this to be something that sits alongside of code for documentation. So I don't know, we didn't talk about it, but we have like a VS Code extension for tldraw so that you can have graphs and be able to edit your drawings inside of VS Code, and then save them to files and commit them alongside your code. And so it's really great for documentation, and the extension there is like .tldr. Like, here's a little too long didn't read. Here's like a thing that's going to explain this visually. And so yeah, there's kind of a couple of angles where I was like, oh, this is actually really useful for this project. And so that's where the name came from. tldraw.
So I can use
TLDR. Yeah.
I love anything I can use in VS Code, and then I can add diagrams to my blog post from the same interface.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, this is blowing my mind. Like, as long as I can stay in VS Code, my productivity like goes up. As soon as I have to go out of then it's like, oh, check Twitter. Oh, duh, duh. But as long as I can like stay in there and like do all my work there, I feel like I can write and code much more. Like I get into that flow state. It's become my like productivity app, I guess, or something.
Likewise. Yeah, no, it's great. And you can even, having your diagrams committed alongside of your code is gets you'll get spoiled on that pretty quickly. So
this is hitting is hitting all the right places.
Right on.
I think that's it for today, I guess.
Cool.
Little bit of housekeeping. If you're listening to this right away, I will be in New York City on Thursday, which is Thursday. What is that Thursday? Is it the 7th? I should have looked that up.
Yeah, it's the 7th, and it's probably today when this episode comes up.
Yes.
Oh, right.
So if you're in New York, hit me up on Twitter DMs, and I would love to meet you because I have, I guess, 36 hours in New York that I need to fill. And other than that, we'll see you everyone around the interwebs, or see you around the interwebs.
Cool. Thanks again. See ya.
Bye.